The conflict was dubbed the Silent War, not for a lack of engagements, but because its onset was imperceptible. There were no ultimatums, no declarations, no intercepted messages, just stars winking out, fleets reduced to adrift wreckage, and planets plunging into darkness in a synchronized collapse. At the heart of every strike was a human fleet, an entity whose existence was unknown. For decades, humanity was presumed wiped out following the Glavian purge of the Sol system. Every major species, particularly the Elkar Dominion, had marked Earth as dead space, scorched and forgotten. A mere footnote in the Dominion's glorious conquest, a warning to any who might dare defy them. The Elkar celebrated the purge annually with fireworks over their capital moon, ridiculing the species that once challenged them. No one in the outer sectors observed the ominous quiet, the faint flicker of dark ships phasing through hyperspace. No one recalled the ancient human colonies lost beyond the rim, nor did anyone question the disappearance of the third generation of Terran exiles who had vanished into the abyss 3 centuries prior. This oblivion persisted until Dion Prime felt this Elkar stronghold, heavily fortified with gravity lances, orbital mines, and 27 defense platforms, was eradicated in under an hour. Surveillance feeds revealed only shadows and death ships, moving with predatory grace, black as the void, devoid of any markings, and powered by technology far surpassing Dominion capabilities. The few survivors spoke of an eerie silence, of immense vessels, eclipsing the sky. No demands, no offers of surrender, just precise, cold annihilation. The Dominion Council dismissed these accounts, labeling them exaggerations, and the survivors as cowards. Yet the same scenario repeated: worlds incinerated, garrisons vanishing, communications ceasing. Panic spread like a contagion. The only common thread linking these incidents was a symbol seared into the wreckage, an ancient Terran sigil, not a flag or an emblem, but 3 words etched in plasma: "We remember everything." High Lord Tarsich, the Dominion's supreme strategist, convened his inner circle. They meticulously searched ancient data archives and dusty records from the pre-purge wars. That's when they unearthed Project Exodus, a forgotten contingency plan buried under layers of bureaucracy. It was spearheaded by a Terran commander who vanished during the final days of the Sol Siege, a man named Commander Uri. He, like all the others, was presumed dead, just like Earth itself. Uri was renowned for his unwavering resolve. He never yielded, not even when Earth pleaded for surrender, not even when the last governments crumbled. He took a fleet and disappeared into deep space, leaving behind a solitary message: "They will forget us. Let them, that is when we'll return." The inner circle scoffed, until a Dominion admiral defected, bringing with him footage of a captured vessel, human technology beyond comprehension. The ship was powered by a core that distorted space itself, capable of instant system jumps, leaving untraceable energy signatures, and wielding weapons that bypassed shields as if they didn't exist. The human fleet wasn't merely advanced, it was furious and methodical. They didn't target civilians or strike indiscriminately. They hit military worlds, data centers, shipyards. Their attacks were strategic, surgical, brutal. Every move hinted at someone who had meticulously studied the Dominion from the shadows, someone who knew precisely how they would fall, and fall they did. Within 5 months, the Dominion had lost a third of its territory. Morale crumbled, factions splintered, and whispers of the Terran return permeated the halls of power. The Council began purging its own ranks, suspecting treason. Still, no one knew the fleet's origin until a single human broadcast shattered the illusion. It lasted 7 seconds. One man staring into the feed with dead eyes, no insignia, no rank, just scars, stubble, and a voice like cold iron. 300 years ago, you burned our world. We remembered. Now, you'll forget yours. The feed cut. The next system fell in 20 minutes. The sky over Earth had been bleeding fire. That's what Commander Ri remembered most vividly from that day. The horizon split by burning satellites, orbital wreckage falling like metallic rain, oceans steaming under energy blasts that fractured the crust. The Elkar called it a purge, but it wasn't war. It was a massacre. By the time they breached Earth's defenses, most of the Terran Federation's fleets were dust. The few remaining warships were old, underpowered, hastily repaired with desperation and makeshift fixes. The outer colonies had long since abandoned the core worlds. Trade had collapsed, politics had decayed. Yet Ri fought on. He commanded the Aegis Dawn, the last of the Vanguard-class carriers. It was crippled, half its systems jury-rigged, half its crew volunteers and conscripts, but it flew. As the orbital stations fell one by one, he gathered the remnants of the old fleet and vanished into uncharted deep space. They called it Exodus. They didn't depart to survive. They departed to be forgotten. The Dominion didn't pursue them. Why would they? Earth was a cinder. Humanity was finished. The Elkar had greater threats to contend with in the galactic core, species with formidable fleets, complex politics, and true power, not some broken mammalian race clinging to nostalgia and ruined stones. But Ri didn't forget, nor did any of them. They drifted for decades through the fringes of mapped space. Famine came first. then madness, then betrayal. 2 of the ships turned pirate, preying on their own kind. Ree personally dealt with them, no trials, no speeches, just air. Finally, they discovered a system, unnamed, marked only by coordinates, 1 star, 3 planets. The second world was a hellscape, volcanic, scarred, toxic, but beneath its surface lay abundant raw metals, pressure-hardened materials, and ancient deep geothermal veins. Enough to build, enough to wait. They named it Haven, not because it was safe, but because it was the last place they would ever stop running. It took 70 years to construct the first city beneath the crust. Most of the original fleet didn't live to see it, but their children did, and those children were filled with anger. Reinstilled in them the imperative to never forget. Through stories, but through silence, through discipline, through preparation. The next generation wasn't raised with dreams of peace. They were raised with schematics, with combat drills, with old war footage from the Seoul Massacre playing on a continuous loop in their training halls. They weren't taught to forgive. They were taught to outlive. By the 2nd century, the descendants had no nations, no politics, no games, only a council of veterans, those who had endured the worst and carried the code forward. Every birth was registered, every resource allocated, every ship designed with a singular purpose, to return. The black ships weren't built for flight. They were built to strike. No signals, no trails. Every aspect from optics to comes to engines was engineered for invisibility. They weren't warships in the traditional sense. They were predators. And the man who led them was no longer Commander Ree. He was simply the ghost. He hadn't aged like a normal man. The medical technology they had developed, a combination of long-forgotten human experimentation and alien salvage, had preserved him far beyond his natural lifespan. Neither young nor old, something in between, hardened, cold. He spoke only when necessary, never debated, never forgave. The Dominion believed it had crushed the human will. What it had done was purifying it. By the time the human fleet was ready, Ree didn't desire justice. He desired silence, the kind of silence that follows extinction. He launched the first wave on his 300th birthday, 6 black ships, no signals, no return path. The target was minor, a Dominion listening post on the edge of Sector 9, but it housed archives, data, personnel, analysts, strategists. It fell without warning, without resistance. The attack lasted 43 seconds. There were no survivors. The Elcar Council attributed it to pirates. But then came the Dion strike, then the Sharon shipyards, then a full Dominion cruiser battle group vanished without a trace near the Dranix Nebula. By then, panic had set in. The ghost never broadcast a threat, never offered demands. He wasn't seeking attention. He was erasing them. One admiral defected to survive. His name was Kovar, a Dominion veteran who had served during the Purge of Seoul. He had retired with honors, believing it was over, until his home planet was illuminated by a coordinated orbital bombardment, faster than lightspeed sensors could track. He knew what it was. Ree hadn't just remembered the names of the planets. He remembered the officers. Kovar surrendered himself to the human fleet. He expected death. What he received instead was a single question. How many others survived the Purge High Command? Kovar divulged every name, every location, every hiding place. The next 4 months were a bloodbath, not of civilians, not of infrastructure, but of command. The very spine of the Dominion snapped like bone under pressure. Back on the Dominion capital, High Lord Tarsich finally grasped the truth. This wasn't a rebellion. This wasn't a resistance. It was a harvest. Every decision made by the human fleet demonstrated surgical precision, psychological warfare, strategic annihilation, and every soldier in black bore no names, only one word, etched into their armor in Old Earth script. Remember. Now, entire sectors were falling without battle. Elcar warships fled at the mere sight of a black silhouette. Refugees flooded into neutral systems, trade collapsed, and planetary governors began declaring independence simply to avoid being next. And still, no one knew where the fleet originated. No traces, no supply lines, no transmissions, just silence. Until the day the ghost finally spoke again. A desperate, cornered, dying Dominion fleet managed to disable one of the smaller human vessels. It crash-landed on a moon near the Arion Belt. A salvage team discovered the wreckage, torn apart by Dominion guns. Inside, they found a single pilot, barely alive, skin pale, blood congealing, bones shattered. But when they attempted to interrogate him, he laughed through a mouthful of broken teeth. "You think this ends with me?" he rasped. "We're not a fleet. We're the storm you thought you could bury." Then he bit down on a hidden neural detonation implant, disintegrating his own skull before they could extract data. Still, the Dominion had one clue, a partial star map. Ancient, fragmented, but it pointed to a system no longer on record, a place buried under hundreds of years of gravitational drift and dark matter storms. They called it the Black Cradle. They dispatched a scout fleet, 12 ships, some of the best they had left, only one returned. The captain of that vessel arrived in a state of catatonic shock. His ship's AI handled the return jump. When Dominion medics pulled him from the cockpit, He had clawed bloody lines down his own face and kept whispering one sentence: "They're building more." The Elcar Dominion's golden age was decaying from within. With each passing week, their empire shrank. Former allies began breaking their pacts. Border worlds started flying new flags, or no flags at all. Trade routes devolved into battlegrounds, and faith in the Council evaporated. The term Ghost Fleet now carried more weight than entire fleets of Dominion warships. Across the stars, whispers spread faster than facts, legends of black ships that warped gravity, of humans who never died, of commanders who walked through fire and emerged colder. But what unnerved the Dominion most wasn't the death toll. It was the precision. Every strike hit something vital. Every decision felt personal. It was as if the humans had spent centuries studying not just their technology, but their psychology, their weaknesses, their patterns. Entire regiments fell into ambushes the humans should never have known about, yet they always did. The Ghost didn't just fight like a man. He fought like a ghost of memory itself, wielding old grudges as weapons. And now, they were multiplying. The Dominion scout mission to the Black Cradle had confirmed it. This wasn't a single fleet. This was an empire reborn beneath the surface of reality, building in silence, training generations on the bones of a dead Earth. When High Lord Tarsich received the data extracted from the lone surviving scout ship, he didn't call his council, he called Project Excision. It was a classified initiative, hidden so deeply that even the Dominion's own elite had only heard rumors. A kill switch built centuries ago for species deemed too dangerous to be left unchecked. The logic was simple: if total war couldn't stop them, genocide would. The target wasn't the Ghost, nor even the fleet. It was the source. Tarsich issued a blackout order on the system known only by its old codename, Echo 7. Records claimed it was a failed mining colony. In reality, it was a prison satellite housing the most advanced bioweapons the Dominion had ever engineered, locked away and forgotten until now. 2 weeks later, a Dominion destroyer arrived at Echo 7 and activated the last stored payload, Orcus 9. It was a plague designed to ravage neural tissue, targeting only specific DNA markers, in this case, the human genome. No cure, no containment. Once released, it would drift through systems, bond to oxygen molecules, and begin the slow process of turning blood to ash. Dominion officers launched the payload and set its path toward the suspected coordinates of the Black Cradle. It never arrived. 3 days into its trajectory, the ship vanished, not destroyed, not hijacked, just gone. The Dominion assumed a malfunction, until it happened again, then again, then again, for separate delivery missions, for disappearances. By the 5th attempt, they ceased trying, because the message came through. Tarsich awoke to it blinking. On his private terminal, no origin, no traceable signal, just a short video file. It opened with a simple shot: a Dominion admiral, one of the plague payload commanders, strapped to a chair. Blood trickled from his eyes, his lips sewn shut, his breathing shallow. Behind him, a silhouette stepped into view. It was the Ghost. He didn't speak at first, just circled the man like a teacher correcting a student. Then, in a voice as quiet as frost, he said, "You tried to finish what you started again." He looked into the camera. "This isn't revenge. This is prevention." Then the screen dissolved into static. The feed ended. The Admiral's body was discovered orbiting the Dominion capital, embedded in the outer hall of the High Council Tower. No explanation, no forced entry, just there. The Dominion's leadership began to fracture. Some advocated for negotiations. Others demanded escalation. A few even suggested abandoning the outer colonies and consolidating in the core. But none of it mattered, because the Ghost had already moved on to Phase 3. His objective was never just collapse. It was isolation. And it was working. One by one, Dominion allies signed secret accords with the human fleet. Not because they loved humans, but because they feared what the Dominion had become. Paranoid, vengeful, weak. Some species remembered Earth differently, not as conquerors or fools, but as builders, traders, innovators. The first race to conquer gravity with nothing but sweat and steel. The first to prioritize emotion over protocol. Now, they were something else entirely. At the edge of Dominion space, in a system ravaged by war, a new kind of signal emerged. It was ancient human code, piggybacking on defunct satellites, repeating the same message. Soul has returned. It was an invitation or a warning. It reached every known sector in under a day. Meanwhile, in the Black Cradle, beneath layers of iron sky and electromagnetic storms, the Terran Council convened. They weren't politicians, nor even officers in the traditional sense. They were survivors, men and women forged in the silence of deep space, guided by the Ghost's teachings. Every one of them had lost something to the purge. Parents, children, home. Now, they controlled the most dangerous force in known space. One of the younger commanders, a man known only as Kalen, stood at the tactical holo table, his jaw clenched, his eyes hollow from years of training in vacuum environments. "Dominion command is flailing," he stated. "Tarsich is running scared. We've crippled their production, shattered their chain of command, collapsed their trade, and the people." Another voice inquired. Kalen hesitated. Starving, fleeing, revolting. Some are even hailing us as liberators. A pause. Then the ghost stepped forward from the shadows behind the council. His coat was dark, frayed, his face unreadable, eyes like burned coal. We are not liberators, he said flatly. We are a warning. Silence. Then he turned to Kalen. Begin phase 4. Kalen stiffened. Are you sure? That puts our assets on open record once we move forward. They already know we exist. But Ghost cut him off. Let them see how far we've come. He tapped a control node. A new map illuminated, star systems marked in red, each corresponding to a key piece of Dominion culture. Religious centers, historical archives, elite academies. Burn the legacy. Leave the bones. It was poetic, in a way. The Dominion had attempted to erase Earth from memory. Now, Earth would erase them. Back in Dominion space, chaos had become routine. Former colonies broadcast desperate pleas for peace. Pirate syndicates claimed entire trade networks, and amidst it all, black ships floated like judges over systems that no longer resisted. But there was one system left untouched, Elcar Prime, the Dominion's cradle, the place where the purge had been signed, authorized, celebrated, where the Ghost's parents had been executed live on interstellar feed as propaganda. For years, no Terran ship had ventured near it, not because it was too dangerous, but because it wasn't time. Now it was. On the eve of the next solar cycle, Elcar's moons were obscured by something unnatural, a fleet so immense it darkened the orbital grid. Not just warships, but terraformers, carriers, massive Obsidian-class dreadnoughts with holes carved from asteroids and reinforced with unknown alloys. They didn't fire, they simply hovered, watching, waiting. And then came the broadcast, not from the Ghost, this time, but from every speaker system, every personal terminal, every public square on Elcar Prime. A single line: you watched us burn. Now you'll learn what silence sounds like. On Elcar Prime, fear had supplanted authority. The capital city, once gleaming with polished towers and quantum latticework, now resembled a fortress preparing for its final stand. For the first time, in generations, the Elcar people saw military patrols in the streets, not for ceremony or pride, but out of desperation. Civilians watched the skies with dread. The artificial moons, once symbols of technological supremacy, were gone, eclipsed by the black ships. They had heard the stories, dismissed them as myth, propaganda, rebellion-fueled lies. But now, the shadow above was real, and silent. No threats, no demands, just presence. High Lord Tarsich hadn't slept in 4 days. Every attempt to contact the Ghost was met with nothing. Dominion fleets had already abandoned outposts, defected, or vanished trying to intercept him. He knew now, deep in his decaying pride, that the war was lost. But there was still a choice to be made. He summoned his command staff to the Central Spire, an underground compound built to withstand planet-cracking strikes. A tomb disguised as strategy. Options, he demanded. Kinidalacros, one of the last remaining loyalists, spoke first. We still have the planetary cannon. Its arc covers low orbit. We could hit the lead dreadnought, their staging ship. Tarsich shook his head. And invite retaliation? No, they're waiting. Not because they can't strike, but because they want us to panic. What then? Akros growled. Surrender? Surrender implies negotiation. They're not here to talk. Tarsich turned toward the central screen. It displayed the flagship, no name, just the Terran sigil, 3 stars, cracked and burning, wrapped in an Rabaris, a symbol of rebirth through destruction. We hold, Tarsich muttered, until we know their intent. But they didn't have to wait long. The broadcast came exactly 72 hours after the first shadow appeared. It played across every channel, visible and encrypted alike. Even children's implants couldn't block it. Dominion A has failed to intercept or halt the feed. It was as if the system itself had submitted. The screen went black. Then an old Earth melody began, a piano, softly, broken, a tune from centuries ago, lost to most species but unforgettable to Terran blood, a nursery lullaby. Then came the voice, the Ghost. You watched our world die. You cheered as children turned to ash. You built empires on bones. And now, when the wind turns, you wonder if the storm can be reasoned with. His face appeared older now, worn, scarred, but behind his eyes calmed a calm of someone who no longer doubts, someone beyond rage. We were not your equals then. We are not your equals now. We are something else. Something you cannot measure with fleets or alliances. He leaned closer to the feed. You thought silence meant submission. It didn't. It meant calculation. The feed cut. Seconds later, the first strike hit, but it wasn't a bombardment. It was a pulse. A coordinated EMP burst across every Elcar orbital platform, war satellite, and planetary cannon. Lights died. Gravity anchors collapsed. Drones dropped from the sky like dead birds. The capital city plunged into blackout. Then came the second wave, not weapons, but voices. The Terran fleet deployed wideband psychological warfare programs. Loops of purge footage played back over the city's public squares. Reversed images of burning Earth mirrored with present-day Elcar footage. We remember. We are not gone. The civilian population broke. Riots erupted as fear escalated into madness. Parents tried to flee with their children, only to find that transport networks were frozen. Panic became suffocation. General Akros attempted to launch a retaliatory strike manually, but the command center doors never opened. When his guards tried to override the lockdown, they discovered the access codes had been rewritten, by whom no one knew. But then someone checked the logs. The override protocol had a signature not Elcar, not Dominion Terran. The ghost had already infiltrated the system's brain. Tarsich stood in the observation tower as the sky flickered with the dance of orbital fire. Human ships weren't firing in waves. They were dissecting targets, one defense structure at a time. Never overkill, just surgical. One by one, the lights over Elcar went out. But Tarsich wasn't finished yet. He activated the final protocol. Deep beneath the capital was a chamber most Elcar didn't even know existed. A vault containing a relic of the pre-Dominion age. The Soulfire protocol, an AI weapon that merged with a user's consciousness, amplifying commands into computational warfare. It required a life to activate. Tarsich inserted his credentials and placed both hands into the neural cradle. Pain ripped through him as the AI flooded his synapses. It screamed against his mind, ancient, furious, twisted, by time, but it responded. Above, Dominion war factories that had been dormant for centuries powered on, drones launched, counter-signal barges erupted, and orbital mines activated. It was Elcar Prime's last gasp. And the ghost answered it personally. On board the flagship, Vigilant Memory, he watched as Dominion defenses screamed back to life. He didn't flinch. Do we engage the drones? Kalen asked at his side. No, the ghost replied. Let them exhaust everything. But they're regenerating systems. They're adapting. Exactly. Let them reach their peak. Let them believe they still have control. Minutes passed. The battle in orbit intensified. For a brief moment, Elcar weapons actually grazed the outer hulls of Terran dreadnoughts. Dominion command rooms cheered until every single Terran ship disappeared. Not exploded, not shot down, just vanished. Sensors read nothing. Communications blacked out. Even AI tracking systems failed. Elcar forces froze. Then the ghost reappeared, not in orbit, but on the surface. Dozens of black ships dropped from low atmosphere. Bypassing all defense layers using transgravity folds the Dominion had only theorized about. They landed silently across the capital like judges stepping into court. The ghost walked among them, no helmet, no armor, just a black coat, a pulse pistol on one side, and silence on the other. Elcar soldiers surrounded him, trembling. Some dropped their weapons, others fired only to find their guns jammed by unknown interference. He walked straight toward the central spire, and no one stopped him. Inside, the elevator rose. Tarsich, still plugged into the Soulfire cradle, felt the tremor. His vision blurred. The AI screamed in protest. The elevator doors opened, and the ghost stepped in. Tarsich tried to unleash the Soulfire's full wrath. Digital tendrils lashed out to kill the intruder, but they didn't reach. The ghost didn't even move. A single pulse from a drone behind him, an anti-neural wave, neutralized the entire cradle. The lights dimmed, the AI died, and the Elcar dream ended. Tarsich coughed blood, slumping forward, eyes wide in disbelief. You're not just soldiers, he gasped. You're gods. No, the ghost said. Just men you should have killed properly. And with that, Tarsich died. His body slumped over the machine that once made him a ruler. Outside, the Black Fleet began its retreat. No occupation, no demands, no banners. The Elcar Dominion had fallen, and in the silence that followed, one message was broadcast to the entire galaxy. Let this be the only warning we ever give. There were no victory parades, no fireworks, no grand declarations from balconies. The Terrans didn't celebrate, they dismantled. Within a week of the Dominion's fall, the Black Fleet withdrew from Elcar Prime and vanished into the stars without a trace. Cities were left smoldering but untouched by further strikes. No installations were occupied, no spoils were taken. And the message was clear. This was never about ruling them. It was about erasing what they were. Across former Dominion space, species scrambled to comprehend what had occurred. Some cheered in the shadows, glad to witness the Elcar's downfall. Others panicked, unsure if the Ghost's fleet would come for them next. But no further attacks came, just silence. The Terran fleet was gone, like a storm that rolls in, tears the sky open, and disappears before dawn. But inside the Black Cradle, the Ghost didn't rest. He watched the stars from the observation deck of the Vigilant Memory, the ship that had led the war. The others had returned to Haven and the surrounding colonies, now fully self-sufficient and hidden again under advanced cloaking veils, but the Ghost remained in the dark, orbiting nothing. He stood alone, except for one figure beside him, Kalen, the commander who had executed the strikes with unwavering loyalty. They're rebuilding already, Kalen said. What's left of the Dominion's smaller factions, civilian councils trying to piece it all back together. The Ghost didn't look away from the stars. Let them. You don't want to strike again. We struck enough. Kalen hesitated, then asked the one question no one else dared. Was this justice? The silence stretched long. When the ghost finally answered, it came out hollow. Justice doesn't feel this empty. Kalen didn't reply. He knew better than to press further, but the doubt had been growing for months. He had felt it during the Phase 4 operations, when they'd hit not just military targets, but historical archives. Educational centers not to destroy knowledge, but to erase identity. He had watched children flee burning homes, not because the fleet aimed at them, but because the war didn't distinguish anymore. Kalen remembered the purge. His parents had died screaming under Dominion fire, but now, years later, he couldn't ignore the pattern. Had they become the very thing they hated? That night, Kalen walked into the ship's data core and accessed something forbidden. Operation Ember Protocols, a buried file, under black clearance. One only the ghost was supposed to access. It contained logs, thousands of them. And they weren't war plans. They were execution lists, not just soldiers, but scientists, historians, engineers, civilians flagged for cultural contamination. They weren't all guilty. Some were just Elcar. Kalen stared at the files for a long time, then quietly walked out. He said nothing, but the seed of doubt had taken root. Back on Haven, the mood was different. Generations of humans, children, and grandchildren of the exiled had never even seen Earth. They didn't carry the trauma of the purge the way their parents did. All they knew was the cold, the silence, the drills. And now, the silence was lifting. For the first time, sunlight touched the domed cities under Haven's crust. The blackout protocols were lifted. Streets buzzed with cautious music. Laughter echoed for the first time in decades. A council gathering was held, not a military one, a civilian one. A historian named Merrick stood before a crowded chamber and asked the question everyone feared. What do we do now? They had been bred to fight, trained to avenge. Every system, every school, every song had been built around pain and retaliation. But now that the war was over, no one knew who they were supposed to be. Merrick proposed something radical. Restoration. Of Earth, it was gone. But of knowledge, of culture, of the things lost, not just in the purge, but in the obsession that followed it. There was resistance, of course. Some saw it as betrayal, others called it weakness, but the motion passed. For the first time since the Ghost's exodus, the Terrans opened their gates to outside species, not as conquerors, but as witnesses. A new fleet was built, not black, not silent, white. Sleek diplomatic vessels staffed with a new generation who had never fired a weapon in war. They were called the Recall Envoys. Their job wasn't to threaten, it was to remind, to tell the truth, of what happened and what could happen again. But even as Haven began to bloom, the Ghost withered. He spent more time in isolation, fewer orders, fewer meetings. The crew began to whisper. Kalen visited one night. He found the Ghost alone in a chamber of relics, pieces of old Earth, a broken Terran flag, charred remains from the first orbital strikes, and a photo of the original Exodus crew. I read the files, Kalen said quietly. The Ghost didn't turn around. Then you understand why we couldn't leave it to chance. They weren't all guilty. They watched, the Ghost replied, and watching made them complicit. But what about, as Kalen asked, what have we become? For the first time, the Ghost turned. His eyes were bloodshot, tired, not from battle, but from memory. We became survivors. Kalen stepped closer. And now, the Ghost had no answer. He simply looked down at the cracked photo in his hand. You know the irony? He whispered. I don't even remember their names, my crew, the ones who followed me into exile. I burned so many memories to keep the mission alive, that I forgot what we were saving. Kalen watched him, heart heavy. It doesn't have to end like this. It already has. A few weeks later, the vigilant memory vanished. No launch, no broadcast, no trail. The Ghost left no message, only his coat hung on a chair in the command bridge, and a final log file embedded in the ship's AI. It played only once, to Kalen. I was not a hero, the Ghost said. I was a knife, a tool. I did what needed to be done. But a knife doesn't belong in a cradle. His last words, don't remember me. Remember why? The Ghost's disappearance changed everything, not all at once, not in a grand moment, but like erosion, quiet, subtle, inevitable. At first, the Terran command structure held strong. Kalen and the remaining council members took charge, guiding Haven and its allied colonies toward a new era, one built not on vengeance, but on remembrance. The white ships of the Recall Envoys became a familiar sight across former Dominion territories. They were welcomed in some places, tolerated in others, and outright rejected by a few. But even those who hated the Terrans dared not attack them. Not. Yet still within the heart of Haven, a new tension stirred. Some of the old guard veterans who had fought beside the Ghost, men who had lost everything in the Exodus, began to murmur. They saw Kalen's diplomatic missions as weakness, a betrayal of everything the Ghost had built. Among them, one voice grew louder than the rest, Commander Drex. He had served under the Ghost during the first strike on Dion Prime, a ruthless tactician, loyal, unyielding, but his loyalty had always been to the war, not the Ghost's vision of calculated justice. Now, with the Ghost gone and Kalen preaching peace, Drex saw his opportunity. At a closed-door assembly deep in the military dome, Drex stood before a small crowd of hardened officers and said what many feared to admit. "We were made to end them," he growled, "not to preach to them." Kalen, of course, was aware of the tension. He had spies in every unit, every corridor of Haven's core. He knew Drex would move eventually, but he hadn't expected it to be so fast. On the 5th month of peace, a Terran envoy ship, Pathfinder Blue, was shot down over the Author Expanse. There were no survivors. At first, local pirates were blamed, but when the data logs were recovered, the truth was worse. The projectile had been Terran, one of their own. The war hadn't ended, it had only changed shape. Kalen convened the emergency council under the stone halls of the original Exodus base, where the first black ship had been designed, and where the Ghost had once sworn to return only when the war was over. Now, Kalen stood at that very same pulpit, reading the recovered logs aloud. Trajectory confirms a stealth drone launched from orbit. Sector 9G, weapons signature matches, prototype line, Ghost Reapers. A hush fell over the room. Those ships weren't supposed to exist anymore. They had been decommissioned after the Elkar fall, stored, scrapped, but someone had kept them. A council member leaned forward, voice tight with dread. "Is this Drex?" "We don't have proof yet," Kalen answered. "But if it is," Kalen didn't hesitate, "then he's become the very thing we fought." Far from Haven, hidden in the remains of an old Terran relay station orbiting a dead moon, Drex had built something he called the True Path. It wasn't a rebellion, not exactly. It wasn't even a fleet in the traditional sense. It was an ideal one built around a single belief. Peace was betrayal. He recruited silently, not with grand speeches, but with whispers, with promises. "You served with honor," he told soldiers in the shadows. "You watched comrades burn. Now Kalen wants you to play diplomat while the galaxy forgets what they did to us." Some joined for belief, others for rage, some simply because they were lost in the silence that followed war. And Drex gave them something they craved: purpose. Kalen, desperate to prevent civil war, launched an outreach campaign. He sent emissaries, offered amnesty, promised inclusion. Most were never heard from again. One returned, barely alive, with a single message burned into his armor: "The Ghost was our sword. You are just the sheath." For months, skirmishes remained isolated. Sabotage missions, whisper campaigns, propaganda spread through neural link networks, casting Kalen as a coward, a politician, a traitor. Then the attacks escalated. 3 colony vessels were destroyed in hyperspace ghost strikes that matched Reaper tech. Entire systems began withdrawing from the Haven Pact. And the worst part, some former allies of the Dominion started arming again, because the message was getting twisted. To them, there were no more humans, only black ships and white ships. And if the black ones were back, they'd strike first this time. The cycle had begun again. Only now it wasn't a war between Terrans and aliens. It was a war within humanity itself. One night, deep within the vaults of Haven's war archive, Kalen stood before the Ghost's final logs files, locked behind encryption he was never supposed to see. But the system had changed. Without the Ghost, the network defaulted to senior authority override, and Kalen was now that authority. He played the last log. The Ghost appeared, not in armor, not in uniform, but as a man haunted, tired. "Every war leaves a second war behind," he said. "The one no one talks about, the one in the hearts of those who can't forget." He leaned forward. "I trained them to win. I never trained them to stop." And there it was, the truth Kalen had feared. The Ghost had built a machine of vengeance, but he never built a way to turn it off. Now, Kalen had to do what even the Ghost hadn't done: end it. The plan wasn't complex, but it was dangerous. He would find Drex not to fight him, not at first but to face him, to offer him something no one else had: closure, not as a commander, but as a witness. He ordered the council to keep his departure classified. Only one man knew, an old technician, who had once served with both the Ghost and Drex. His name was Bale, and his body was failing, but his memory was still sharp. "I told him back then," Bale rasped. "You raise men to be blades? Don't be surprised when they start cutting on their own." Kalen nodded. "I need to talk to him." "Just talk," Bale laughed bitterly. "Then take armor. You might need it." 3 weeks later, in the silence of the dead moon orbiting Varn's belt, Kalen landed a white stealth pod on the old relay station where Drex had built his fortress. No guns, no fleet, just a signal flare and a message. "Commander Kalen, alone, unarmed, requesting parley." The hatch opened 3 hours later, and Drex walked out. He looked older, rougher, eyes bloodshot, voice heavier, but his back was straight. "You have a lot of nerve," he growled. Kalen didn't flinch. "So did the Ghost. That's why we followed him. You turned your back on his mission. I honored it," Kalen replied calmly. "He gave us justice. I gave us a future. You gave them mercy." "No," Kalen said. "I gave us mercy." Drex stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a snarl, he drew a blade, an old Earth combat knife etched with the Ghost's name, and stabbed it into the ground between them. "Talk," he growled, "but make it count." The relay station was silent, no hum of reactors, no flicker of ancient monitors, just cold metal and the breath of two men who had survived a war but now stood on opposite sides of what came next. Commander Drex's knife trembled in the floor. Between them, vibrating with the station's low-orbit oscillation, Kalen didn't look at the weapon, he looked at the man. "You've been busy," Kalen said, eyes steady. Drex sneered. "While you give speeches and paint ships white? Yes, some of us remember what we were trained for." "You were trained to end a threat," Kalen said calmly. "The Dominion's gone." "No," Drex barked. "It changed. It's hiding behind children now, behind councils and restorations. They just wear new skin." Kalen stepped forward, careful not to provoke. "And what are we, Drex? What do we wear now?" The ex-commander's jaw clenched. "We wear the memory of soul, of burning oceans, of ash in our mouths, and screams in our ears. We wear the truth." "Then tell me the truth," Kalen said. "All of it, not just the part that justifies more killing." Drex crossed his arms. He was built like a machine, but his face carried years of pain behind the hardness. "The ghost taught us that mercy is a trap, that forgiveness gets you killed, that the only peace we'd ever know was the silence of our enemies. He also disappeared," Kalen reminded. "He left no order to burn the galaxy. He left us to choose." "That was his mistake," Drex spat. "He left you?" Kalen sighed. "Drex, we've already won." "No," Drex said, voice low and bitter. "You want a pause? And in that pause, our people forget. They marry alien blood. They erase the names of those who burned. They call our cause extreme, even dangerous." "Because it is," Kalen snapped, sharper than intended. "You're breeding another war. Only this time we'll be killing ourselves." Drex stepped closer. "Then maybe that's what it takes. Purify the legacy before it becomes weakness." Kalen's face darkened. "So this is about purity now. It's about direction?" Drex growled. "We were heading towards something. Unity, discipline, power. You turned us into another galactic debate club. I gave us survival. You gave us decay." The words hung between them like venom. Then Kalen said something he hadn't meant to say aloud. "Do you even remember what peace feels like?" Drex blinked, and for the briefest moment, something cracked. The commander looked away, into the flickering darkness beyond the station's hull. "No," he admitted. "I don't. Haven was never home, just a bunker with air. Earth was the only thing that felt like anything, and we lost it." Kalen saw the truth. Now not just anger in Drex's heart, but grief, the kind that turns to hate because it has nowhere else to go. "You didn't start this movement for war," Kalen said quietly. "You started it because you can't live with peace." Drex didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. Back on Haven, unrest had begun to boil. Rumors of Kalen's disappearance spread. White Fleet commanders grew nervous. A few border colonies pulled their ambassadors, fearing the return of the Black Fleet. One of Drex's lieutenants, a man named Vorin, launched an unsanctioned attack on a small trade route used by Elkar refugees. 3 ships were destroyed, all unarmed. The message was clear. Drex's movement wasn't in hiding anymore. We're testing the lines. Kalen's return would have to come with a reckoning, either a truce or fire. Back at the relay station, Kalen looked at Drex and saw the edge drawing near. "I'm not here to argue philosophy," Kalen said. "I'm here to ask you one question." Drex raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Kalen took a breath. "If the ghost walked in here right now, would he be proud of what you've done?" Drex didn't answer right away. Then he turned slowly and walked to a small steel case embedded in the wall. He opened it. Inside was a small data cube, an old analog chip wrapped in blackened alloy, marked only with the ghost's original Terran ID code. "I have his last war file," Drex said. Kalen froze. "That file was deleted." "Not all of it," Drex said. "The AI wiped the primary log, but the relay systems captured a signal of backup, uncompressed, buried under interference. And you've never shared it," Kalen said coldly. "I didn't want to taint his legacy, or be proven wrong." Drex stared at him, then tossed the cube onto the floor between them. "Play it." The relay station hummed to life. A projector flickered, and then there he was. The ghost, older than either of them remembered. His voice was raw, unfiltered. "I built a monster," he said, "and I did it with purpose, with clarity. I needed them to fear us, to make them understand what it meant to erase a world." He looked off to the side, then back at the recorder. "But I forgot what happens when monsters outlive their makers." He paused. "I see Drex, I see Kalen, 2 branches of the same fire. One burns forward, the other tries to warm others." His eyes narrowed. "They'll both be wrong if they forget why the fire started." He leaned forward. "The war was never about revenge. Not really. It was about remembrance, about dignity. If we trade that for dominance, then we've already lost." The feed ended. Silence. Then Drex whispered. He knew. "Yes," Kalen said, stepping closer. "And he chose to vanish rather than feed the war anymore." Drex looked hollow, shaken, a man unmade. "I believed I was preserving him." "No," Kalen said, gently, "you were preserving the pain." Outside the station, Terran Reaper-class ships appeared on sensors, unmarked, cloaked in shadow, awaiting Drex's signal. Inside, Drex stared at the blade still embedded in the floor, the one he had carried for 20 years. Then, with slow hands, he pulled it free and sheathed it. "I'll call them off," he said. Kalen nodded, shoulders heavy with relief. "But I can't promise they'll all listen," Drex warned. "Some don't want peace anymore." "Then we show them the truth," Kalen said. "Not with words, with action." Back on Haven, the White Fleet mobilized not for war, but for division, healing. Kalen returned, not as a victor, but as a messenger. He brought Drex, and together, they broadcast the Ghost's final message to every system where humans still lived, not as a threat, but as a choice. It was called the Reconciliation Broadcast. Every Terran ship, white and black alike, every listening post, every allied colony, every satellite still orbiting the bones of dead Dominion planets was overwritten not by force, but by memory. The image of the Ghost appeared, speaking from the grave through a relic of war, not with fire or vengeance, but reflection, and the words mattered, not because they were perfect, but because they were true. And finally, the truth was louder than the pain. The broadcast ran on a loop for 3 days. In that time, more than half of Drex's rogue fleet stood down. Some returned to Haven, surrendering arms voluntarily. Others simply vanished into space, choosing solitude over rebellion. A few refused entirely, but they were no longer an army. They were shadows, and without Drex's rage to anchor them, they drifted. And Drexy stayed, not in command, not in power. He took a post as a silent advisor on the new council. His name was struck from all public record, his role left unspoken. Kalen never once called him a hero or a traitor. He called him what he was, a consequence. Haven changed, not overnight but visibly. Memorial halls that once glorified victory were redesigned as museums, rooms of honest history. Photos of Earth, burned in bright, logs of Dominion, atrocities. In Terran retaliation, names of civilians lost on both sides. The narrative shifted from retribution to restoration, and with it, a new generation of Terrans began to emerge. They weren't bred for war, they were raised to remember, to study how the fire began and why it had to end. The recall envoys expanded, now joined by former enemies turned Ellis species, who once feared the Black Fleet now flew beside it under banners of shared memory. And finally, the cycle began to break slowly, painfully, unevenly, but it broke. Kalen visited the Ghost's last resting place alone. He had the vigilant memory recovered, its orbit decay stabilized and sealed in geostationary memory, as a warship, not as a tomb, but as a monument. He walked its halls in silence. Rooms still smelled of cold metal and discipline. Every console still marked by the Ghost's touch, precise, minimal, efficient. But in the commander's quarters, on the far wall, was something Kalen hadn't expected, a handwritten note, preserved in stasis. He opened it slowly. It read, "Kalen, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer the weight holding us together. Good, that means they finally looked past my shadow. Lead them better than I did. Teach them that silence is not always the answer. And when they ask, about me, tell them I was wrong too, not about the war. About how it would end. We were never meant to vanish. We were meant to remember." Kalen folded the note and tucked it into his vest, not as an artifact, but as a promise. In time, the former Dominion systems elected their own leadership, independent, guarded, but open. Some invited Terran ambassadors, others politely declined, but none fired again, because none forgot. And Earth, still gone, still ash, but one sector untouched by the fleet, had been quietly designated by the Terran Council as a memory zone, a sealed sector orbiting the sun with artificial gravity fields and orbital beacons repeating a single phrase. Here stood a people who refused to die quietly. It wasn't a planet anymore, but it was still a home to memory, to pain, to dignity. Decades passed. Children of war grew into teachers, soldiers became farmers. Old black ships were scrapped, melted down, and forged into hospitals, libraries, peace stations. And in the outer edge of known space, where the stars grew quiet and ancient ruins whispered across void winds, a scout vessel discovered something strange, a transmission. Not Terran, not Dominion, not known, just a single phrase in an unknown tongue, roughly translated, "Where is the fire that once taught the galaxy fear?" Kalen read the report himself and smiled, not because it was true, but because it meant they remembered, even in fear, even in silence. The last scene plays out, not on a battlefield, not in a ship, not even in space, but in a classroom deep within Haven's rebuilt core. A child raises their hand and asks, "Were the humans really monsters during the vengeance cycle?" The teacher pauses, then answers softly, "No, but they were angry enough to become them." And that was the truth. The fire hadn't been justice. It hadn't been evil. It had been grief. And finally, after centuries, it had cooled. But it would never be forgotten, because no one knew where the human fleet came from until the Empire was gone. And by then, it was already too late. If you enjoyed this journey through the silent war and the rise of humanity, hit that like button. Leave a comment below telling me what you found most surprising, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into galactic history. Your support helps this channel continue to explore the untold stories of the universe.